You're working with thinking about your rational and irrational numbers, thinking about any questions you might have. Remember, we're still going to be having quizzes on those perfect squares and cubes that you need to memorize. Your worksheet from yesterday that was due, we're going to make sure we check that today. 1 to 6 aren't here, but you see 7 to 12. And then 13 through question number 20 that we'll look at solving and checking. Today's lesson is simplifying radicals. Well, key thing, how do you kind of simplify radical? A radical is simplified when a perfect square or perfect cube cannot be factored out. So the key thing we want to do when we simplify our radical is we want to try and rewrite the radicand as the product of a perfect square or perfect cube. That's why that list of perfect squares and perfect cubes are so important to memorize. So rewrite them, say them out loud, whatever you need to do. You're then going to evaluate the perfect square or cube, which you should be able to find the square root of that. Repeat until the radicand cannot be factored with a perfect square or cube, and then multiply your roots. So we're going to do some examples. You should see these examples in your notes. And we are asked to simplify. So if you want to make sure you're going to write that we are simplifying, and I'll say square root 20. Now, we know we can estimate that, but we want to think what's a perfect square that divides into 20. And the perfect square that divides into 20 is 4. Now someone said, oh yeah, 10 goes in. 10 isn't a perfect square, 4 is. So we want to use 4 times 5. Do we know the square root of 4? One of our perfect squares. Since we know the square root of 4, the square root of 4 is 2. We're going to have times the square root of 5. Now square root of 5 can't be factored into a perfect square, so our answer is written as 2 square root 5. What I want you to think now, and pause the video please, is think what's factors of 63 that's a perfect square. So if you divide 63 by what number? And we want this number to be a perfect square. And I'm sure some of you can think of this right off if you know your perfect squares. And if not, look at your perfect square table. What divides into 63? True, the same thing for 490. For 48, we're going to look at cube, and then 98. So try and 63. Pause it and think about this. 63, the perfect square is 9, and it's 9 times 7 gives us 63. When we look at 9 times 7, the square root of 9 is 3. 7, can't find the square root of that, so we're going to have times square root 7, and our final answer would be 3 square root 7. How do you know if you did this correctly? What you can do is put this in your calculator and find the square root of 63, and then put in your calculator 3 times the square root, and then put 7 and see if you get the same answer. I'd like you to pull up your calculator and try that right now. If I'm looking at my calculator and I see the square root of 63, I'm going to take 63 and I'm finding the square root. And it comes out to be 7.93. And if I put in 3 times, and then we have 7 square root, we get 2.645. And if I think of that square root of 63, I had 7.9, I gotta check. Oh, excuse me, I see where I made my mistake. It said 3 times that. We want to just put in 63 and find the square root. So 7.93. I gotta check out this calculator how to get it to work to get the other one. So now I'm gonna put 3 times, and I'm gonna put square root. Nope, that didn't do it. Here's what we'll do. We'll do the square root of 7 first, so we'll put 7 square root, and now we're going to take that times 3. And we get the same exact answer, that's 7.93. 937. So at this point, we can see that these were exactly the same. We're looking at 490 now. What's a perfect square? If you look back on that list of perfect squares, 49 is, and 10. The square root of 49 is 7. Can't factor, well, we can factor 10 as 5 times 2, but neither of those are perfect squares. So our answer is 7 square root 10. This is a little tricky at first, just thinking about the numbers. If you think about 48, now remember, here we're looking at cubes. So if we think about our perfect cubes, remember it was 1, and then 8, and then 27, and then 64. So which of these can divide into 48? 8 can. So we're going to take the cube root of 8 times 8 times 6 gives us 48. So the cube root of 8 is 2 times the cube root of 6. Our answer is 2 times the cube root of 6. A lot of times they don't put the dot for multiplication, they leave it that way. I would like right now for you to try when you come into class a negative square root of 98, and all that really means is that our answer will be negative. Look at your list of perfect squares. So think about your squares. 1, 4, 9. What divides into 98? Now if you don't recognize something, you notice it is an even number, so try dividing it by 2. Here, again, we're going to look at your perfect cubes. So when we look at our perfect cubes, remember we memorized them up to the first 5. Which one can divide into this? Now again, if you don't recognize it, you might recognize that you can divide by 5. Tomorrow in class, we're going to have this worksheet. I show another example of simplifying out and looking at your radicals, and we'll be working on this in class. Hopefully this went well.